Okay, welcome everyone to today's co-creation session that's going to last about 90 minutes. My name's Joss Colchester. I'm going to be your host and the facilitator for the workshop. And I'm joined also by Manali, my co-host, who's going to pick up any questions you may have and answer any questions you may have as we go along. So we'll be working for 90 minutes on our mirror board here that we see in front of us. So Manali will hopefully share a link for you to join. And we'll get started shortly just to show you what today's session is going to look like. This is the mirror board. Maybe you're familiar with it. Maybe you've joined for past sessions. It's called the SI Canvas. You'll find it on our website. And we're going to put the challenge in the center here as you see it. The challenge, of course, being how might we enable the emergence of a truly participatory city? These are cities that are co-created by the people who form part of them. And we're then going to be working on these two sections here to map out the different factors affecting that dynamic. Different dimensions to that, social, psychological, environmental, economic, technological, and so forth. We'll go into that in a minute when we get started. After we've done that, we'll go into this next section looking at leverage points. These are places where we may intervene to start to change this dynamic and grow beneficial outcomes. So to give you an idea of what this looks like in practice, as mentioned, here's the challenge in the center. And then out from there, we're going to start, you'll be grabbing your stickies, the participants, and posting them up here. Different factors, as mentioned, and I have one example here. One factor affecting how we participate and engage in our cities and our urban environment is around manufactured goods. And we know at the moment, most of those are produced in factories. They're mass produced. And we, as individuals, don't really engage in the production or co-creation of those goods. So that's one factor I posted up there. And then moving out to leverage points, the places you might intervene to change that dynamic. We have out here, we might develop local fab labs with decentralized 3D printing or technology like this for people to start to create their own goods. So that's just an illustration of what we'll be doing today. And just to give you an idea of kind of how the timing is going to work, a little intro now for maybe the first 10 minutes. And then we'll take 35 minutes for the mapping and leverage points for each of those. There'll be about 15 minutes of posting up, participants posting up their ideas. And then we'll have a discussion around those with our coaches. So we're going to get introduced to our wonderful coaches now. Here they are. So we have three great coaches, Dima, Stefan, and Eva. And let's just have a little hello from them to get introduced. Dima, would you like to say hello and where you are and a little bit about yourself and your interest in this respect?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dima, and I'm an urban planner by training. I have a boutique consultancy called Biospheric City Lab, and we look at all aspects of sustainable development. And I also teach at the Sorbonne University in Abu Dhabi. I'm based in Dubai right now. And I'm glad to be here. Participatory cities are something that I'm very keen on because it is part of social sustainability and it's extremely undermined in urban planning. So it's great to explore opportunities to increase participation for all citizens.
Great, thank you, Dima. I guess, yeah, when we think about cities, we think a lot more about the physical infrastructure, don't we? And this is more of a social fact of how do we engage people. And I guess going back to the theme, it can be a transformative thing, isn't it? Something we might quite easily bypass in search of smart cities or sustainable cities and green things and smart things everywhere. But it's an interesting idea how it could really transform the spaces we live in if we really started thinking about how to engage people. Okay, so thank you very much. So Stefan, I'd love to hear a couple of words from yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Joss, and hi everyone. It's great to be here. A super exciting event. So I'm Stephen. I work for an organisation. I'm based here in London, in the UK, and I work for an organisation called Resilience Brokers. And what we're trying to do is to bring about systems thinking and collaborative approaches to achieve transformations in cities. We think that those are some of the tools that are needed to tackle some of the systemic challenges that we're facing, such as climate change, aging populations, affordability. There's a whole range of things, and I'm particularly interested in this topic here. I'm an engineer by background, and so I've done quite a lot of work in buildings, making buildings more sustainable, and in energy systems, and so I get that sort of engineering approach to systems thinking. But then over the last 7-8 years working at Resilience Brokers, studying at UCL and also teaching at University College London, I'm seeing a lot more about it only works if you involve people, considerations of people and involve people in that sort of decision making. And I would also say include consideration for the environment. So I'm really excited to be here working with you all today.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, interesting. You mentioned all those challenges, right? And it's something quite cross-cutting, this, isn't it? This participation. It could be almost used for tackling any challenges, you say, an aging population for sure. How can we have people actually take care of, the people around them, should we say? So actually it's something you could, water, for example. How could people actually be, harvesting their own water and storing their own water and sharing their own water? I've seen examples in Mexico City, very, very interesting ones, but almost every kind of challenge we face in cities, we could take this approach and think about how to actually engaging people could really shift the dynamic and help us tackle that issue. So Eva, great to have you join. Where are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation, Josh and the team. And also, hello, everyone. And so excited to be here with you today. A bit about me, I come from Mexico, but I'm based in Denmark, where I currently do a PhD, an industrial PhD, which is within a company, on trying to bring closer the gap between all the sustainable solutions for mobility and transport, and put a closer understanding of what are all the social relations, all the stakeholders that are involved into achieving this transition in a more sustainable manner. As even though we have a lot of solutions out there in the aim of environmental and economic factors, we're still a bit behind on the social parts. And yeah, during the last 6-7 years, my work is being highly focused on shaping strategic collaborations and innovation processes for sustainable challenges and transitions. And my interest in participation comes with the great need to better understand and bring together different stakeholders in ecosystems. Yeah, so that's basically all.
Yeah, creating platforms and creating spaces in our cities for bringing people together is super important, and I guess often overlooked, isn't it? It's very easy to come up with a solution and push it out to people. Actually creating spaces for them to come together, collaborate, and create those spaces and environments themselves. So all this emergent stuff we're talking about in systems innovation. Okay, so thank you all for joining. Great to have you. Our coaches are going to be animating the discussion as we go along. What they're going to be doing actually is post up your ideas now they will be looking out for the ones they find interesting and they want to discuss with you. And they'll be taking these little tokens here. So each one of these tokens, this is 20 tokens. Each one of these, one token is worth €1. So there are rewards here. You can redeem them afterwards. I'll tell you how to do that. They're going to be looking out for the ideas they find interesting and want to discuss, and they're going to take their little token as we go along and place it on those ideas that they'll then discuss with you, the participant, once we get there after posting all the ideas. Okay, so that's that. That's how it's going to work. What will all of this look like, hopefully, when we come to the end? Maybe you've been here before. This is what the last one looked like. This was on circular economy. Yeah, quite a cosmos of stickies going on there, and some really interesting ideas when you dig into it. So hopefully we'll come up with something like this for how to engage people in the co-production of their urban environment. And at the end, we will, after the session, we will, myself, Manali, will synthesize what we came up with and try and share back to you kind of the highlights and so forth. Okay, so yeah, hopefully you're all familiar with Miro. It's quite simple. You just grab a sticky here and you're going to place it down and then you're going to type in here. We'll just get started now, 1 minute. Keep it reasonably small, and then you type in your idea here. And you're welcome to type in as many ideas as you see relevant. So that's that. If you have challenges with Miro, any questions, Manali, at this stage, or are we good?
No, we're good. Questions.
Okay.
Good for me
Great.
as well.
Cool. So here we go. We're on this first section here, the mapping section, and we want to think about different factors affecting this dynamic. So we've laid some out here for you. Let's keep our stickies relatively small. So we've laid out some here for you. Social factors, so it might be things around education, around healthcare, politics, regulation. Then we have some psychological ones up here, how people are thinking about their urban environment, stuff around security, an interesting one to consider actually. How the kind of social structure of whether people feel safe or secure, how that actually affects participation. So mental models, be a big one. Incentives, behavior, and then down here we have economic ones around finance, commerce. If it's a general category, say business or employment, you want to put it under that general category there of economics. So down here we have technological ones, manufacturing, transport, energy, and then going up here, environmental ones, ones about space, spatial planning, the built environment, water, materials, food, and so on. So let's jump in. We'll take now 15 minutes actually, so that we can have a good bit of space to collect as many ideas and have time to think about the ideas that we're putting up. And yeah, we'll take 15 minutes now. We'll go quiet and hopefully you'll think about those and post them up. Any questions or issues? Once again, post them in the chat there and we'll pick them up. Okay, there we have it. Well done for all your ideas there on the factors and actors affecting this dynamic. We're now going to jump over to our coaches to have a little discussion about what you've come up with here. So Dima, do you want to tell us what you found? Dima, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, lots of interesting ideas. I was particularly interested in the spatial, but I do see a lot of overlaps between other aspects like the psychology, the spatial, the transport as well. I'm seeing a lot of overlaps in here, the food production, but it's also very closely tied to the spatial. So I'm wondering how I'm going to sort of connect the dots between all of these, because it's basically what I do. Urban planning is like bringing everything in the city in a coherent manner. So I'm seeing a lot of links to health and well-being, lots of interesting stuff.
Anything in particular you'd like to highlight?
The one thing that comes to mind, which I think is essential for everything, is identity. The talking about identity in the city, how someone sees themselves in the city as an individual versus as someone who is part of a community is essential to the co-creation process. And how do we empower people to view themselves as part of their community, as a collective, and less as an individual, is very important to the co-creation process.
Yeah, some really interesting ones here about it's kind of mental models, isn't it, and psychology, and we're kind of getting to the iceberg metaphor, isn't it? It's like changing the mental models is going to be the kind of biggest thing here, really. I think it's a really interesting one. And the perception, people put things here around perception of, identity, which gets to kind of groups and us and them, and where we draw boundaries, really, isn't it? It's about what we include in ourselves. I mean, a large city, each little subunit of it has its own identity, doesn't it? And I know personally, I almost never go to West London. I'm almost always in East London. And I think of myself just as East London. I haven't been to West London in a long time. So it's an interesting one, the identity and how that causes psychological barriers, doesn't it?
Yeah, also relates to the environment. I think the reason why we're not we're able to achieve much on an environmental level is because everyone says it's not my problem. It's like, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect my family, it's really not my problem. If there is no incentive or obligation to recycle or to reduce weight, many people would think it's not their problem. So I think shifting that mindset from an individualistic mindset to a community one, and then looking at the environment as the planet, kind of tries to solve the issue as well. So we're solving many things at the same time by shifting that mindset.
Anybody want to talk on this? Anybody who posted something up here? This idea of identity and shifting the mindset. There's quite a bit here, narratives. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know
Susan,
if you can.
is it?
Yeah,
Yep.
Susanna. Yeah, I do notice, just as Dima was saying, it's actually a really important part, the narrative that we're all pushing along as a society, and as we are working with these narratives, believing in those narratives, or making a decision to change the narrative, because it's kind of like me being a brain enthusiast and understanding that our brains are wired for stories. They're wired for these repetitions that and these cultures and constructs. So it's important that the critical thinking comes in, and that we really take onus on our locus, the center of really what it is to be participatory. What does that mean? Kindness, active listening, compassion for self and others, all these different layers that we never really address deeply. And until we do that, then we can be there for others in the same way. So narrative is a really, really big factor. Noticing mindset is key here in my view. Anyway, thank you for letting me chat.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if this is your one here, narrative of ownership. Who does the city belong to? And then here, identity. Do I associate myself as part of the local? How many think of themselves truly in this way as part of the local community? How to build and encourage this sense of belonging? Anybody want to talk on that? Build the sense of belonging? Okay, that's very fortunate because we need to stay moving along. So Stefan, do you want to jump in and tell us what you found?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. And I'm slightly bowled over at how rich this wheel has turned into in just 15 minutes. There's so many great ideas and insights throughout. There's a few sort of themes that I've spotted that are coming through. That I'm involved in on sort of a day-to-day basis, and one of those is around sort of grouped under the kind of this idea of deliberative democracy. And we're seeing, particularly in the UK, but in other parts of the world, this idea of a citizens' assembly, of participatory budgeting, where citizens are involved in helping to set local government's budgets. So it's not just a sort of top-down, the city and the environment is done to you and services are provided to you, but there's a real kind of two-way relationship in how budgets, priorities, services, and all of those things are set. And I'm really interested in that area. We're working on a living lab, for example, in Exeter in the UK, but I'm seeing so many other really creative ways of being involved in that. On the social side of things, I quite like, there was one post-it note that sort of jumped out at me. Again, really sort of fascinating group of ideas around here. But this one on integrated purpose of buildings. And I'm seeing more and more questions, discussions coming to the surface, not on retrofitting, which is a sort of a technical upgrading existing building stock, if you like, to make them more energy efficient, but repurposing buildings. And so an office block, a building that might be built to house offices could be repurposed and turned into housing, or could be repurposed and turned into community space. There's a great one. I'm also in East London, and there's a great example of this very near where I'm living, which is the Tate modern art gallery, and that used to be a power station, and it's now turned into one of the most successful visitor attractions in London. So I love this idea of kind of, you can see some of it is called meanwhile spaces. So maybe it's a bus garage. In 15 years' time, it might be built on, but in the meantime, community can take over and turn it into something that's really meaningful place for people to engage in and belong to. We talked about identity just now. I'm also those of you that know me, a big fan of sort of mental models, and there's quite a lot of really good thinking that's coming here. I probably don't have, I only have a few minutes, so I could just sort of skirt over the surface of this, but bringing in sort of indigenous viewpoints, respecting the kind of, where other communities are coming from. There's almost a kind of a big theme here of how we can build empathy amongst communities and break down some of those traditional barriers that might be political or other things, and help give people a safe space to participate and to engage and feel as though the time that they spend in doing that is valued. So I think those are some of the things. I'm also a big fan of active travel, mobility, providing green spaces. I'm actually a ranger of the world's first national park city. The idea of creating a national park and preserving our environmental habitats. In the urban setting, all of the other habitats around the world are preserved in national parks, and this idea that rewilding spaces in cities helps people to notice the butterflies or hear the bees or notice even the weeds coming through the cracks in the pavement. It just gives that kind of change in perspective and narrative that can help build health and well-being.
Great.
A few quick observations there anyway.
Yeah, so picking up a lot on mental models and identity. I thought you touched upon something interesting here. How do we repurpose things even in a temporary fashion? How are people able to actually do that, right? So that gets to kind of bureaucracy and administration and politics, doesn't it? Like how can, because that's quite often the problem here, isn't it? That you might want to do something, but there's a whole pile of regulation and so forth there. We haven't really touched upon that yet, but let's stay going. And I guess that's coming to mental models too, isn't it? Like the way we perceive kind of who owns the city and authority and so forth. So maybe that's just another layer up the iceberg from our mental models. But Eva, tell us, what did you find here?
Yes, well, it was quite nice to go around like the different factors and actually try to see a lot of somehow disruptive ideas or initiatives that there were placing a factor, but to some extent already connected to other factor. So for example, I look into the psychology area and they were talking about groups and the different experience the groups can have and how can this be somehow associated with both psychology and mental models. And likewise, I look at another example in the transport area, on which the initiative was about having in a neighborhood a neighborhood system for shared mobility, and that already relates as well to mental models. So I think also based on my area of work, I look a lot into the psychology, policy, spatial, and transport, which are highly interrelated, and also I was very happy to see there are a lot of approaches on the policy part and governance, but also someone posted about multi-level governance, which is again like is the way we should transition towards. We start like from top, bottom, and bottom up, but then like what is this multi-level overlapping of all different layers that we need to approach, and who are all the different groups representing all these levels? That's highly relevant. So just to bring someone else from the people that put the different ideas, I put here the example of this one says, surely not everyone needs their own car. How about a pool of cars shared across a neighborhood? Maybe the person that put that post would like to come up and comment a bit more about that one.
So it's a good example, isn't it, of how important, how useful, how valuable it could be to getting away from private mobility, or the cost of lack of participation and lack of collaboration and lack of sharing ends us up in a world of motorways and cars everywhere. Whereas if we could do this kind of participation and collaboration, like carpools, just one example, isn't it? Yeah. A similar sort of thing could be taking place across all these other systems also.
And it really tells you about like we have the possibilities to impact the system in all different scales, and initiatives to take ownership and power, they can really start in your neighborhood and getting together, and that really bonds stronger the sense of belonging, but also like shape more sustainable behaviors, and at the same time and strengthen the community feeling. So to me, this was very nice to highlight this example, because it's a way of showing like organization can happen at any level, and impact can already be there from day number one. And then of course, like the replicability of different solutions can reach the greater impact.
Yeah, and it's not something you'd have to wait for other people to do for you, is it? It's something you could, like, we could all just start doing now. We don't need someone to sign it into policy or something. Okay, Dima, do you want to pick up on anything else? We'll move on shortly.
Yeah, I'd like to actually pick up on something that Stephen mentioned about the participatory budgeting. I think we're so far behind in many parts of the world where we actually allocate a budget for participation, but this is taking it to the next level where citizens actually decide on what budgets get spent where, in which area that they think they have priority for as citizens and as a community. And I think it's a very powerful tool, but I don't see it in many cities. Like I think New York has a budget for participation, but it's still limited. Paris has a bigger budget than other cities as well. I'd love to see more of this, where citizens can decide where the budgets go, and I'd love to see a process to involve people in doing this. Like, for example, if we think about the 15-minute city, which basically says that everything that you need on a daily basis has to be within a 15-minute walk, then who decides what the community needs within 15 minutes? I think there's a huge engagement process to understand what the community needs are within those 15 minutes, and how do we allocate the budget so that we could actually give people alternatives and be inclusive at the same time, and give people to participate, give businesses to have an opportunity to exist, and be fair to everyone. So I think it can benefit many things for the city, like the connectivity. I've seen lots of people adding stuff about walkability and access to public space and open space as well. We need to understand the challenges that and the obstacles that people face in accessing public space, and how they use it, and if they use it the right way, if it's programmed the right way. So I see public participation very helpful in creating a mixed-use community, a vibrant community that has everything that they need.
Great. Thanks, Dima. There's a great point. So 15-minute city, a whole nother conversation. I'm going to stay moving on, actually, so we have a bit more time for the leverage points, because things start to get more interesting there. So next 15 minutes, let's ideate, think about where we may intervene, how we may shift this dynamic. So those were mainly factors, but how may we change those factors to shift this dynamic to a more participatory, inclusive, engaged city and citizenship? Let's take 15 minutes to post up our ideas on that before we come back and discuss again. Okay, so well done. Look at all these ideas posted up here. Let's take a look at what you've come up with. I think also we could go back to some of the initial circle also, because there's a lot of ideas posted up there that we skipped over. So feel free, coaches, if you want to pick up stuff back in the first circle or in this second circle. So Dima, do you want to pick up on something here and discuss it?
Yeah, I actually liked two things that I had seen in the leverage points. The first one is early education in city planning and fiscal processes. I think this is something that we miss. A lot of people have fear of public participation because they don't think they have the knowledge. They don't know what the right to the city is. So I think it's important for us to build that capacity at an early age. What are your rights in the city? What can you request as part of the community? How can you assess if something is good or bad for the community? That is something that requires capacity building at an early age. The other one is train and compensate community champions. Not everyone is going to be up to being actively participating in community and co-creation, but some people would be very keen. So I think we should give them incentives by actually giving them extra training and compensating them for their time, because not a lot of people would have the same commitment in terms of time, and time is money. So it's the same thing for the budget. So I think it's building on people's capacities by trying to establish knowledge and share the knowledge with people who want to be contributors and co-creators in their community.
So I guess as well as participatory budgeting, it could be those budgets they allocate could be better opened up to funding people who want to contribute to the commons, really, isn't it, in whatever way, so that we can actually all contribute that little bit and make that right behavior. And I think there's quite a bit down here around tokens and incentivizing people for pro-social behavior. And yeah, I think it's just getting to the idea of like regenerative cities, and it's going to require us to kind of reinvest in the commons, isn't it? All of us, this participatory model, and then, as you say, some kind of incentive, some kind of funding that's going in that direction, and there for us to not $1 million budget for this company to do this for us, but maybe $1 million, and everybody can get a little bit by doing a little bit, or even just avoiding detrimental behavior, should we say, you know, dropping rubbish or whatever it is. Okay. So Stephen, what did you come up with?
A few threads. So one of them is pulling from the sort of the original mapping, a couple of ideas that relate to people's, individuals or communities' time and space. So universal basic income, 4-day working week, living wage, all of those sorts of things. I think that's one of the leverage points that's really interesting, because then, once people aren't working 3 jobs, or in really sort of pressed situations, we've got mentions of the gig economy there. It does give that little bit of headroom for people to participate more in their environment, in their community, to volunteer, to help other people, all of those sorts of things. So I think that's an interesting area. Another one is around training, this idea of community connectors, or what do we say, coaches or community champions. And I think that, if you've taken the first one that I talked about, that then gives people that little bit more space to then follow their passion, and whether they're interested in helping people with well-being, overcoming social or digital isolation, working on digital skills, but also working in the kind of participatory or the civics ideas, how your voice might be heard, how you might be able to petition, write to your representatives, and those sorts of things. And also sort of training or education in systems thinking, in understanding mental models of biases, and building up empathy. So I think there's a couple of threads there in sort of training, support, education. And then finally, we didn't really talk about it in the last conversation area, but big piece on digital. This is sort of so exciting. Clearly the sort of the relationship, if you like, between the participatory city and the smart city is, one of them is digital, the other one's more human. But I think we've got real opportunities to bridge that gap, and I'm seeing so many examples where cities are developing a model of their city in this computer game Minecraft, where school kids then can go in and learn about flooding and impacts, or engaging in, or they could design their new town square and put a bridge in it, or a fountain, or swing, whatever different people want to do. And it's a real, so I would say sort of digitally enabled ways of sharing information and communicating and engaging, and overcoming the sort of digital divide where, using appropriate technology.
Yeah, so like a digital twin concept that people can play with. But also I think it's about just having information about what's going on around you, isn't it? Because it's like we all live in these black boxes, and you have this skyscraper next to you, have no idea what's going on inside that building environmentally, or what people are doing, their work. And it'd be fascinating just to get a visualization of what's happening, even when you walk down the street, having that. We now can do that, right? If we could open up all this data, we could potentially do that with all this VR and AR and so forth. Anybody want to talk about this here? Open data, data ecosystems. Anybody want to talk on this?
Yeah, I'd like to add to this one as well. I think it builds on the smart city principles, because once you have the data, then I see citizens co-creating as taking part in the decision making. Like if we have data in congested areas, then they can make a choice not to go there and make it even worse. And that helps the community actually, because we're having less congestion, less traffic. Could also share information on like disaster areas, people in remote areas that need help, where community can get some of that info. So it is allowing data to be shared, but at the same time allowing people to take part in the decision based on that data as well. I also see it in a way where sorry, I forgot the thread, where people can reach out and make donations to people in need. It's also part of the commitment for people to help. So some people would be the champions, where they actually go and contribute to the community. Others may not have the time. So a digital platform will actually allow them to contribute without actually leaving their home and committing so much time. So it's a combination of physical and digital platforms for co-creation are very helpful, because it allows for different types and levels of contribution.
Yeah.
Just can I mention something on this?
Sure.
I was talking, actually, I put up the note about open data by default, and that's something that's generally an issue for cities that start out by closing all the data. But of course, if there's a philosophy or a general acceptance that people and organizations should allow data to be open and therefore be more transparent, in fact. But more than that, when the data is open by default, it allows innovators and entrepreneurs to take advantage of that, and then literally co-create the city, because you're using the data then to actually add more and much more of a generative discourse in that way, using the data as the material.
Yeah. I think, I mean, good point, right? This we as citizens can't really do very much if we have surrounded by black boxes and we don't know what's going on around us. And I think, Tim, what you're getting at is, we've got to have that information to respond to it before we can really kind of create complex adaptive systems in our cities where we're all kind of interacting peer-to-peer with this data and adapting and so forth. We need to have it opened up and so forth. And I think Waves is a good example. I always think of that, that app that started in Israel where people had it in their car and it was feeding back information about the traffic as they're experiencing it. And then everybody got an overview of the traffic as it's working. And then when you see what the traffics look like, you can say, oh, I'm not going to go to that area, I'm going to go to another area. And the system starts to self-organize, right? Because that was kind of, to some extent, peer-to-peer. And that's really what we're looking for, isn't it? It's going to be so much a challenge, isn't it? In these mega cities, everyone crams in, and then we've got centralized administration, and they get bottlenecks and overcrowded, and you end up with slums and a whole pile of people who don't get services. And we've got to kind of decentralize things, and data is going to be a big part of that, so that we can create these systems ourselves. So, Amy, do you want to chime in? Amy.
Hi, yes, thank you. I think what Dima said about it being a combination of place-based and digital infrastructure is quite key, because I think exacerbating the context collapse that we are all experiencing, that is what you say when you say that we are all in these black boxes. I think that is a rather real danger when we are thinking about how data could be used and facilitate change. But that change, without that, I command whoever put up the point on digital literacy and training, because without that, you will by default exclude people who are not literate, who have not the infrastructure, who are maybe living in data poverty, or whose data is some people are very cautious about their data being available, whether it's prison leavers in the United States or people who suffered from domestic abuse in the UK. So there are a lot of contentious issues that I don't think that without it being anchored in place could satisfactorily and safely and inclusively serve folks who might be homebound and elderly, as well as young people who might be very well versed in how to build stuff in Minecraft.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Okay, let's see, moving on. Eva, what did you come up with this time? Eva?
Yes, sorry. Well, actually, my starting point on this part of the discussion was related also to the literacy and like the importance of training. And I think Amy brought a very important point, because when we aim participation and co-creation, there are, of course, different levels on how to conduct it, and you can consult the people, you can get data from them, you can also invite them to collaborate in platforms and digital platforms, and all of those different ways are fine, but one needs not to forget, like, not one solution fits all, in the sense like there will be situations in which a digital platform will really enable other groups to join into the conversation, while it will limit some. And I can just mention a local example here in the context of Corona last year, while holding citizen participation meetings online, you could reach other groups, such as, for example, moms with newborns that could not physically attend out of being busy at home. They could all of a sudden join into the call and be there and have a say and also co-create, while elderly groups that are not that highly related to technology could not be part of it. So just to keep in mind, like, how to address these black boxes is a key point. And also, like, consultation and gather data and use platforms and incentivize them is fundamental, but not leaving aside the big question on how to generate ownership and responsibility. So that's one of the stickers that I highlight as one that correlates directly with the literacy and training. How does the training, especially maybe in the early years, gets in a level that you take ownership and you really understand that you need to also contribute to make to get the skills to influence the change. And I just to switch a bit, I also highlight another post-it, which is the one that is just there on the top, about modeling experimental ecosystem to inform living relations. And I don't know if the person that wrote about it would like to say something about this idea.
Yeah, that was I mentioned that. Yes, Stephen here, thank you. Yeah, basically I see that we have different ways that we can experience something at different scales of living. So my experience at home only extends into my community, but my workplace is quite separate, or other people's workspaces. So we have all these different kind of what you could call an experiential ecosystem where we make meaning, where we understand what's going on, we can make choices, we can speak to what's going on, but there's always going to be some which are outside or hidden, happen at different scales, different institutions, different. So how can we model those from within and then try and relate them in a sort of a living way? And I think that can be useful because we often need to do sense making, not just hard, what you could call dead data. There needs to be that kind of living dynamics. So
yeah, totally agree. I mean, I'm also working directly on that and trying to come up with this holistic understanding and considering scales and not even like spatial elements, but also digital elements and multiple stakeholders. So I'm not there yet on how all this information can nurture better solutions, but there's definitely a point on exploring it and potential from even like bringing together commonalities and make them stronger.
Yeah, and being able to see all of this would be amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, all these networks, a city is just a network of networks of all kinds of networks going on around you, and we don't really see them, do we? We see individual people in buildings and parks and this and that, and we, without being able to see them, we can't really respond to them. We can't really engage in them. We can't be part of it or help to develop them and so forth. I imagine actually being able to see the networks around you and how you might be able to participate and collaborate in the effects of doing that, right? We really don't live in that world yet, but it would have a huge impact, that change of information flows so that we can see what we're a part of or could be a part of is a huge one. And getting to the idea then of collaboration, people are putting stuff down here, ecosystems, all these ecosystems around us and how we can participate in them and enable collaboration within them and the benefits of that, which almost completely kind of excluded from us. We don't see it at the moment. Okay, so Stephen, you want to pick up on anything else here?
Yeah, just fascinating conversation. Thank you. I would just add to that that last little bit about the idea of collaborative mapping or collaborative modeling, and we've seen this, we've used this, and we've seen this done in a number of places where communities themselves build up, collect their own data, hold their own data, or create a map of their environment, and not just the physicality, but also the kind of institutional connections where they rely on services and so on, and that's really an effective way of getting that sort of ecosystem understanding, perhaps. So just to add that point.
Yeah, and the digital twin idea, we often think of that in physical space, don't we? Buildings and so forth, but imagine that in the context of social relations and flows of resources and collaborations and so forth. We really don't have that at this time. And going to, if we're thinking here about transformation and so forth, it goes back to the iceberg model, you know, down at the bottom levels are changing information flows and the structures of that information and incentives. But the one we got to at the beginning was the big kind of paradigm shift, changing our thinking. Was a big one. So someone put really interesting stuff down here. Do you want to, anybody want to mention on this? Talking about changing from a resource to a partner, a place to dwell, place to flourish. Anybody want to speak on this? Who posted it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, this is Ali here, and I had posted those. I was just thinking of certain like overarching paradigms. You know, going back to the point that someone made about narratives and how those narratives kind of serve as a foundation. So, you know, how might we view the people? Like, what is their role? You know, are they consumers? Are they workers versus, you know, people with responsibility? And if so, how, you know, how do you delegate that responsibility? Is it, you know, something that is, you know, forced upon people, or do you incentivize it, or do you facilitate that? And then the same with with the city as well. And there's a bit of overlap, right? So is the city a place to just live and consume, or is it a place that we, work towards, work with? It's almost like thinking of, does the way we live dictate how our cities are, and at the same point, how we design our cities dictates how we live. So there's sort of a relation there. And then I added another paradigm just out of the conversations that were happening, as well as being mindful of this, I guess, techno-utopia, or technology as a savior. There might be problems or solutions within the community that might not require that data or that technology or that internet. And as someone mentioned as well, like an over-reliance on that might disenfranchise others that might not have access to that. So just, I was working off of like Meadows' leverage points, and paradigms being higher on the leverage points.
Yeah, and you're getting to a feedback loop there, aren't you? Between how our mental model then leads to how we look at the world, how we go about managing and designing these systems, but then we live in them, we inhabit them, and then that shapes. And a good point you made there about, do we force people to participate? But I think one way of looking at that is more shifting it to the people who, formally are the kind of managers and administration, maybe just saying they have a responsibility to build participation into everything they do, right? And then it's up to other people if they want to be part of that. But more often we don't kind of build that into what we're doing. So we never even get a chance to see if people want to. If they don't want to, fine, but we don't actually, create that in the first place. So yeah. Okay, so anybody else want to pick up? We've got a couple of minutes left. Any other topics we want to discuss here? Population dynamics, aging structure, identifying diverse needs of groups. Yeah, this has been the main one coming out, right? Not everyone's the same. Not everyone's going to be able to engage in the same way, right? A child versus an elderly person versus an adult, it's going to look very different for them. You're going to have to kind of engage them in different ways in their participation. Who's included? How to be mindful of needs of future generations. Anybody want to talk on this little cluster here?
I actually wanted to add more on the consumption point. I like that point very much, because looking at environmental issues, I think we could look at many things, but the elephant in the room is always consumption for me. Our consumer habits needs to change. And I wonder if being co-creators of our environments, of our cities, could change our consumption habits, because we're more involved in it right now. We have more appreciation to the processes that take place in manufacturing and creating spaces and food production and everything. And I wonder if the more involved we are in creating our cities, the more conscious we become as consumers. In the long term. That wouldn't happen in the short term for sure, but it's the appreciation of how things get created when we become part of it that make us less of individual consumers and more of like sharing, having the mindset of sharing resources rather than consuming. And I want more and bigger and more private. So it's just a point to
it goes back to the feedback loop, doesn't it? The way when we live in this built environment that we create, we get this very strong feedback loop between the way we're thinking and what we do, and the world we live in, which then feeds back to how we look at the world. I think about maybe a democracy versus a dictatorship. Like once you move into a democracy and people start to see that it works, there's kind of a feedback loop there that we're just going to stay going with this because it works. It's a bit like here, like people might say, well, I'm too busy to participate in the city. But actually, if you started to build things that were open and participatory, people got a sense of it, you would probably get a feedback loop going over time to build upon that.
Joss, can I just add to what Dima was just mentioning just now? In fact, I put up the make visible consumption and waste, and that was triggered by the notion of smart meters, where the idea behind them were to actually allow people in their own homes to know what they themselves are using and also what their neighbors are and so on. But I have to say there's also it's a double-edged sword as well, which it allows people to be maybe prone to be bullied, if in fact, in saying, oh, you're the ones who are consuming too much. Look at us, we're the ones who are not consuming so much. So this kind of visibility of consumption has to be played really quite carefully for these kind of reasons. But nonetheless, it definitely does work. It makes people know, I am using this much and I am on this side of the normalized curve or the consumption curve.
Yep.
So I can, see myself as a goody, or, oh my God, I need to sort of buck up my habits and sort of improve things. So either way, but there are other factors that may be insidious as well.
Yes, I'm not sure if we have Kobus with us here today, but he's from South Africa. He does spatial representations of cities. And he talked about in Cape Town how they had water crisis there, and the government actually released data about how these different communities are using more or less water, and it's quite a risky thing to do, actually, getting to your point. Okay, great. So there we are, guys. Amazing stuff. Really, really fascinating, actually. And as people were asking in the comments, we will be synthesizing this. We're going to wrap up now. Our time is up, but we will look through it and see what we'll also bring in, our discussion here. We talked about mental models was a big part of it. We talked about data ecosystems, visualizing the networks of collaborations and so forth, and different ways people need have different capacities to be engaged. There's a number of different points, and we'll look through these, synthesize them, put them into an infographic, and share back with all of you at a future stage. Also, for redeeming your tokens, if you've got a token on one of your ideas there, you can send them to info@systemsinnovation.io, and you will be able to redeem those. So we're perfectly on time, so we're going to wrap up now. Well done, everyone. Thank you very much to the coaches. This was really a fascinating, rich conversation, actually, and I look forward to what comes out in the infographic. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.